And welcome everybody to today's show of the F show that struggled, I think about 3 times. We had technical glitches. We tried several different options, but unfortunately could not get directly onto Facebook or YouTube. So our apologies to all our guests who have been waiting from all over the world. But as soon as we get this recorded, we will upload it onto the F show and onto Wexprint and onto the Aya Facebook page. So I'd like to welcome our wonderful guests. African Fashion Connects is part of Films Feel Connected, a project of the British Film Institute and in partnership with Aya Films. So the hashtag is We Are Aya Films. So if we could please see the website of Aya Films, Justine. I think it's important, if you have an opportunity, to please visit the website for more information. And there is a blog as well as some short fashion films, which I think would be very, very interesting. Thank you. August month in South Africa is Women's Month. And for those of you who know, the 9th of August is National Women's Day, and it was the day when 20,000 women marched to the Union buildings during the period of apartheid, and they were fighting against the past laws. So during this month, we really celebrate and commemorate the women in South Africa. And I'm so pleased that we can do this with our global guests, all wonderful fashionistas, people who are really amazing in their own right and in the quality of their work. But as we do this, I would like us to just consider paying a little tribute to a very good friend of ours who passed away during this pandemic. His name is Yusuf Chichikaji. And the reason I thought that we should shine a spotlight on him was just his unique way of dressing. He had such a peculiar and wonderful style. And we wanted to show a few of the images of Chichikaji, a real giant amongst us all, and we feel really blessed to have been amongst him and his wonderful family. And as I talk about this, the community that Chichi came from in Azadville, Roodepoort, was a community of political activists, women, in fact, who taught other women to design and produce clothing during the apartheid era as a way of making money. So at least whilst everybody else was involved politically, producing clothing was another way of them bringing together some kind of funds to grow the sector, to grow the community. And this Roodepoort community also hailed some amazing activists, the late Ahmed Timol and Yusuf Dadu. So for this August month, I thought we should also just shine a quick spotlight on these activists from Roodepoort School and that community. I would like us now to show Iwan's short film. It's just a clip that we will show, Iwan, of your amazing film, and in a way you take us through this textile world, which is quite a colorful world of textile design, clothing from Holland, Nigeria, Indonesia, and everything else in between. I absolutely love this film. So can we show that clip?
Patterns, the style.
It's not just material, it's not just looking pretty.
Outside, we would call it African print or wax print. But if you're an insider, it's just clothes.
Hot wax, applying it to the fabric.
So the dye will only pick those areas.
It's a knowledge passed on from one generation to the other.
Women had significant power because they sold wax print.
How many girls have you trained?
Very, very many. I can't remember.
We have more than 350,000 design color combinations. This design, the name from the market is the ungrateful husband. You wear it and then you're telling your husband that he's been ungrateful to you.
Missionaries were selling these prints to African women. Missionaries sent their information to Ebenezer Brown Fleming, a Scottish merchant, sitting behind his desk in Glasgow, who then commissioned cloth in the Netherlands.
The local industries are suffering. The Chinese are free to run roughshod over everybody. They are looking at their profits, and that's it.
They copy our designs and they put our labels on it, 100% counterfeit.
So here we go. Text the code to confirm that it's a genuine pack. Product may be fake. Do not use.
Is one group of people being able to make up a load of money from other people's labor and ideas.
Identity is so important.
Africans were growing cotton using natural dyes and trading amongst themselves before the Europeans came.
It's ours. We need to understand it and claim it. It's not about being from Jamaica or being from Africa. It's about being black.
Wow, that's absolutely beautiful. I want to tell us about the process of making the film, but more importantly, your interest.
So yeah, the film, I started making the film back in 2016, and it feels so long ago. When I look at that trailer, I've not watched the trailer in, I don't even know how long. And I'm just like, wow, A, I have hair. And B, it feels like a lifetime ago, you know? But the process of making the film it actually started out as a short film. I just wanted to make a 5-minute film to promote my clothes that I was making at the time. So I had a clothing line called Honor Men. And I wanted to show my customers a little bit about where the fabric comes from. And I thought that would be a really simple thing. It was obvious, you know, you buy it in London and it comes from Africa, obviously. So then I just thought, let me add some nice, snazzy shots from Afropunk. And then I went out there and then I kind of got more questions than answers. I kept hearing all this like colonialism and Indonesia and stuff. And that brought back just memories of my grandma saying Hollandaise and insisting that Hollandaise wax prints were the best wax prints of all the wax prints, because there are some African made ones as well. And then I remember thinking, yeah, actually, I remember hearing that term. And then obviously just me being me, I wanted to dig a little deeper and find out a little bit more. And as I kept digging, there were more questions. And as I answered those questions, more questions were posed. And so what should have been like a 5-minute mini film just to go on my website turned into this epic 2-year extravaganza known as Wax Print, this 97-minute long documentary.
And the documentary is available on the Aya website, I think, until the end of the month. Is it on your website as well?
No, just on Aya Films. Yeah, so everybody can go through that.
So I do think people should go and have a look. It's a wonderful film. I was fascinated myself, and just like you, I was 20 years ago, I think, when I first went to Nigeria, I was looking at all this fabric, and they kept saying wax. Dutch. I was, why are they calling it Dutch? It was so confusing to me. And I think I must have felt like you, quite horrified, you know, that suddenly what we believed was African was actually had such a long story. Christelle, I'd like to come to you, having been born in Madagascar and traveled around the world doing different things. Can you share with us your story, please?
Yeah, sure. Hello, everybody. So yeah, like you mentioned, I was born in Madagascar, and I lived there until I was 10 before I moved to south of France. And my interest in African fashion is really, my grandmother was a dressmaker back in Madagascar. But also I grew up near some French missionary, and had a design and knitting school. So I started to learn about designing and sewing in that school before I went to France. And then when I moved to the UK about 20 years ago now, a long time ago, I kind of starting to become a makeup artist back in 2010. And a lot of the work I was doing was around with like Black creatives. So I slowly get drawn back again into the fashion, but I keep being drawn a lot more around African fashion. And now I'm also curating quite a lot of African fashion show in Bristol, where I live. And I also curate some exhibition around African history. So you can see on the screen, that's an exhibition called African Queens, which narrates stories of historical and legendary African queens. And also now currently I'm studying a PhD in anthropology, but around dresses again. But I'm looking at the history of the Herero women dresses in Namibia. And that is again very much linked to the German genocide in Namibia, and how those women have taken on the dress of their oppressor as a way of just revolting against the colonialism. So that's what I do. And I've got a small collection of design as well, but I haven't got enough time to do much at the moment.
That is fascinating. And I think the idea, as you say, of the women in Namibia wearing the colonial dress, but they've also kind of somehow Africanized it. And amazing that the language, because for me, traveling there, and all the what they speak Afrikaans.
Yes.
And for us, it was, the language of the oppressor in South Africa, even though we know that more people speak Afrikaans than they do English, in fact, in South Africa. So well done, congratulations, PhD, wow, that's exciting.
Yet.
Sandra, we know that you're actually in wonderful Greece at the moment, even though you're from the UK. Tell us about your work.
Okay, so my name is Sandra, and I run a company called Knots UK, where we sell African print head wraps and accessories, all made by women for women. And so we were really interested in making sure that we were supporting women, but supporting women in Africa, because we know the material comes from lots of different places. But what we wanted to do was support women who lived in Nigeria, Kenya, and Zambia. So we buy our material directly from these women in those locations. We get the material shipped here, and women cut and sew the fabric here for us in London. And I think there is, if we look at Iwan's film, there is a real kind of complex history around the turban and the head wrap. So my family is originally from Haiti, but I grew up in America, so I have a link with the Caribbean. So I grew up with women wearing head wraps on a daily basis. And I think also in America, we started to notice that Black Americans started to wear kind of dashiki in the 70s and 80s. So kind of reclaiming back the African print. And it started to become a lot more popular. And I think wearing the head wrap is kind of reclaiming back what was taken from us, because as we know, when we were taken from Africa as slaves, we were stripped of our African fabric, we were stripped of everything that meant something to us, and we were given t-shirts to tie our hairs with. So it's, in a way, we want to reclaim that back, and we want to take it back, and we want to celebrate that. And also we want to we want to kind of show the women who came before us, we want to appreciate what they gave for us to be able to wear that. So when we wear the African print fabric right now, we're reclaiming that, and we're taking ownership of that, and we will not be oppressed.
Wow, that's wonderful. And you have a partnership, I think there was something else in terms of women with cancer that you were looking at, am I correct?
Yes, so one of the reasons we started the business was a friend of mine got cancer, and she noticed I was wearing head wraps, and she said, could you come and show me how to wrap my hair? And I did. I showed her how to wrap her hair. And then because she was going through chemotherapy, she knew other women who were also having chemotherapy. So I showed those women how to wrap their hair. And it was just another alternative to the wigs they were given. And it was a way of making them, and for them, this is what they said to me, they really wanted to feel like a woman. And so they wanted the head wrap to be wrapped really high in a very kind of modern way, so it still felt like they had hair underneath, which was really important to them. And so that's one of the reasons why we started the business, was to support women. So everything we do is about supporting other women. So we only buy from women. We work with a charity called Hello Love, which are based in Holborn and London. If anybody is going through treatment or has just been diagnosed or knows someone, please go visit that charity. They give you free advice, and there's lots of kind of free courses. And we are ambassadors at this charity, so we support them. We also are part of a new magazine, Women Rising magazine, that will be going out to hospitals and the Macmillan nurses, and that is in support of Black women with cancer, because these are things that we find no one's addressing at the moment. So we want to keep those conversations going.
Thank you, Sandra. That is so important. And in the South African context, you know, when Mama Winnie Mandela passed away, we were all wearing the turbans, we all covered our hair. And right now we're dealing with gender-based violence, and they've created a new project. They're calling it the Black Doek. So in Afrikaans and in South Africa, they call the scarf the doek. So they're wearing black scarves, black doeks. We together are against, you know, the whole issue around gender-based violence. Our president's been saying that we've got two pandemics. Of course, the pandemic, which is COVID, but the pandemic against gender-based violence. So it is interesting as we come to Taslim, because she's made some wonderful different headgear as well. And for us, Taslim is my sister, but we come from an Islamic Muslim home and tradition. So I think the cultures, the mixing up cultures, because that's another space and another conversation that we don't have as often as we should, because we're all wearing in some form and way a headgear. And I'm wearing today, I'm actually wearing Nigerian. My husband's Nigerian, I travel to Nigeria. So it's just about how we take the cloth and what we do with it. So Taslim, welcome. Tell us, I think we might first start with your Torino fashion show, Taslim. Can we see that, please, Justine?
Güzel, daha mutlu, daha adil, sevgi dolu bir dünya için, barış için, tüm bu dünya.
Absolutely love your clothes, Taslim. Tell us about Bulbulia threads. Tell us about your journey. You're probably the most experienced around here, so go for it.
So I grew up in South Africa, Muslim of Indian and mixed heritage. And I think for me, it's always been you know, when people say, where are you from? It's always such a deep question, because I identify as a South African. But then you also have this idea about, oh, you are appropriating different cultures. And I don't see it as that, because I am an African first, I'm Muslim, I'm Indian, I'm Indonesian, I'm all different types of heritages. And so for me, it's all about just fusing everything together, because that is who I identify as. Sometimes I always think that, us growing up in Africa, we are African. Even if people who look at us say, but you're not. We are African. We're born of the African soil, and we identify as African. So for me, I've been in clothing industry my entire life. And I started very young as a designer, aged 18. I'm now in my 40s. So I've had about 25 years experience. And it's really been a journey of coming full circle to really who I am as an individual. And, it is quite an eclectic mix for some people. It's very loud, it's very bright, it's very colorful, but it is a celebration of my mixed heritages. And I think when I created Bulbulia Threads, and that's why it carries my name, it's just a reflection of who I am. Bulbulia being an Arabic word meaning a singing bird or a nightingale. And I decided in 2016 to launch my Bulbulia Threads label at a national fashion week in South Africa, and to promote modest wear. Modest wear is a huge phenomenon globally, but in South Africa it's still in its infancy. And people identify modest wear perhaps with only Muslim women, but modest wear is across every culture, every religion. I think women at a certain age decide they want to cover up a little more, or they want to have their clothing speak louder, or their voices be heard rather than what they look like. It's more about what I'm saying. And so I then started, investigating all the different ways of showcasing modest wear. I myself think I'm a modest dresser. I've always have been, because I've always worn lots of fashionable clothes, but I've never been one that showed a lot of skin. So with my label, I then looked at, okay, which are, different ways of wearing a head covering. And since I'm African, I prefer to wear the doek because it's colorful, it's made of cotton, it doesn't come off your head. And people, identify with the way the Arab people wear their headscarves or hijabs or whatever you want to call it. And so because I was showcasing, I got invited to showcase in Malaysia, which I won. I think was interesting for me as well, going to Malaysia and showcasing the wax turbans, but also realizing that those fabrics come from Indonesians, and the batik and the wax and the dyeing processes and all of that, it's the same thing. And I think they were so shocked to see an African designer come and bring something which was so familiar to them, but interpreted in a completely different way. And so I felt that if I want to showcase South African modest fashion internationally, I need to have something that sets me apart. And for me, it was really the wax cotton head wraps. In South Africa itself, we don't really have that many different prints. Ours is predominantly called shweshwe, which is also interesting because traditionally African women would wear sishweshwe as their clothing, and most other South Africans would identify it as a domestic worker's garments. And I think about 10 or 20 years ago, or maybe around 2000, 2002, 2003, it became quite a fashionable statement for fashionable people to start wearing the shweshwe as a fashion item, as opposed to the kind of clothing that your worker would wear. And so I think in South Africa, we've gone through such a transition in terms of fashion and making African fashion kind of have global appeal. We have many designers locally, Makosa, we have, so many that have gone internationally and into Europe. And we have the likes of Louis Vuitton and the rest kind of stealing all our creative talents from here and using it in a way they want to interpret it. But, Africa is kind of the one continent that hasn't been as exploited as the rest. And there's still such a lot of raw talent here. And the way in which African people interpret or wear their clothing is so unique and so different to what a European sensibility would be, or an American sensibility, etc. So it's kind of, because South Africa is a Western country, we wear Western clothing, but we interpret it from an African, Indian, whatever mixed heritage we have standpoint. The other thing I did with my turbans was, these ones specifically have been treated with a nanotechnology. So they have a cooling and a conditioning treatment done on it. It's a company also based in the UK called Cellessence. And the reason we did that was because women who wear hijab traditionally, the hair underneath it doesn't get the sunlight, it doesn't breathe, it needs conditioning. So we try to incorporate that into the turban. So when you wear it, it kind of gives off a nice fragrance and it conditions your hair. Yeah, I think I've said enough.
Thank you, Taslim. So that, I think, Sandra, that's a nice connection for you and Taslim. I want to just throw a span in the works here and ask you, Iwan, when we think about, I've got my kente cloth here at the back, as you can see, my Ghanaian cloth, but the whole issue around Black Panther and the fact that people did feel, you know, this was a film that came out of the US, and even though it was, I would say, predominantly a Pan-African diasporic participation in terms of design, there has been a lot of question amongst filmmakers in Africa, whether it's the Nollywood scene or just South Africans, who felt in a way, you know, done by that design that should have been local and authentic. What did you think, or what are your thoughts around something like that?
Well, I think with Black Panther, it's a really good film. It just is, it's a really good film. And I think it's the first time ever that Black people have seen themselves and the culture represented on screen. There's also this thing of African Americans are Africans too, right? They are from Africa, they are African descended. It doesn't matter how many hundreds of years displaced they are, they're still African, they're children of Africa. And so they have as much right as anyone else to take African designs, reinterpret it, use it, showcase it to the world. Because what we've got to understand with, I guess, everything to do with Africa going into the future is that unless we can take control over the economics of the things that we create, then we're going to always lag behind the West, right? And so how do you take control of the economics of a thing? Well, if we look at capitalism, I'm not saying I agree with capitalism, but that's the system we live in and we have no control over that. But it's through the marketing of your products. It's saying to the world, this is something we have, this is something we value, and so you value it too by spending your money and buying from us and adding to the generational wealth of our children, right? So I think that for me, I see it as a massive marketing tool, because in that one film, so many people globally became interested in African cloth, in African fabrics, in African style, in African culture. And you know, people wanted to visit some of these places that were mentioned as the source of the inspiration for these cloths, right? I take, for example, Nigeria, right? I remember growing up in the 80s and the 90s in London, and it was embarrassing, shameful to be African. You know, you were literally like abused for it. I was bullied for it because that was a shameful thing. Everyone wanted to be Caribbean. So it was like, so you'd get Nigerians who would literally change their name somehow, some way to be more Jamaican, and they talk with a Jamaican accent and stuff like that. And then of course your mum turns up on the playground and she's got a Nigerian accent, and then you're just cringing in the background, you know? And then if I look at the work that Nigerians on the continent have done over the last 20, 30 years, they have literally single-handedly done a massive PR campaign, whether knowingly or unknowingly, that has changed the perception of Nigerians globally, which has meant that people now buy Nigerian music, Nigerian food. So we've got like Jollof Box in London and stuff like that. They're buying Nigerian films. It's the second or third largest film industry in the world, right? They're buying Nigerian fashion. They're interested in Nigerian fashion designers. I mean, I see no issue with it at all. And in terms of authenticity, I feel like we define what's authentic. We define that. So what's authentic to an African American is a beautiful thing. What's authentic to me as an African British person is a beautiful thing. What's authentic to an African in the continent, there can be different kinds of authenticity. We define that because for so long, authenticity has been defined by white people. They've said, if they say something's authentic, then it's authentic. And now we're saying, no, we're saying it's authentic. And that's that, end of story, point blank.
Christelle, I think I'm curious to hear, because you've gone from Madagascar to France, and I'm a little bit, I'm always concerned about the Francophonies, and particularly the French, where they really want to, to just completely assimilate everything about them and their language and culture. How do you find your space there, and how do you stamp your mark?
Well, I've actually lived in the UK longer than I lived in France, which is quite interesting, but I've got a French passport. So I am French. And I mean, it's an interesting one. I think, and a lot of people in the diaspora probably relate to that. It's just feeling that's kind of feeling in between or two worlds, kind of being, you know, my heart is with Madagascar and Africa always. But at the same time, I was raised in the Western way. So I've got this kind of two amalgamation of life, and I cannot, you know, use one without the other, because this is how I am. And I think as people being raised in the diaspora, we have to embrace both sides of our upbringing. And for me, I think for a long time, when I arrived in France, I kind of picked up everything that the French are doing. But then now it's kind of the other way around. I'm kind of needing to reconnect with Africa. So a lot of the work I do is very much around Africa, African history, African culture, African fashion. And I think it's really important for me because as an identity, if I don't have that part, I do not feel complete. So I think that's the way I kind of stamp myself in the world today, and being, it's kind of almost like accepting that there's two sides of me, and, you know, I cannot give up the Western side for the African side, and I cannot give up the African side for the Western side. I have to kind of take it from those two sides. And I think from what Aaron was saying earlier, I think the way us in the diaspora kind of interpret African film, and you know, I see it with the exhibition I did on the African Queen. There are some critics who said that, you know, there was some romanticism on the way I portrayed those African queens, because obviously I don't have the means or everything to make it the same way as it should be. So I used whatever I could find, but also what's kind of my view of those queens. So for some people, it wasn't that authentic. But my, and this has seen it again quite recently in social media with Black is King with Beyonce, where there's a lot of criticism. But for me, I've always said to people, do it yourself, show us what you can do, and maybe I can learn from you. So I think for me, it's you do whatever you feel is good and what your interpretation. And I think art in itself, it's so personal, and there's so many different ways to interpret one story. So I think we should just embrace who we are and mix our bringing. So for me, I've got a lot of influence from Madagascar as much as France and the UK, because I've kind of, you know, lived in those three countries. And I've got a lot of friends also from various parts of the world. So that's, again, it's another influence for me. So I'm kind of taking everything from everybody and move forward that way.
And just blend it all and mix it, which I think is wonderful. What
Exactly.
about Sandra? Sandra, how do you feel that connection and that mix?
So I certainly feel like I'm an African queen, I'm a Caribbean queen, and I'm an American queen. So I feel like I'm everything and all things. I don't feel like there's one single thing that defines who I am, but I am a Black woman. So that is the thing that defines me. I think the connection with the African print, I think for me, it's always been there because I grew up with it, being from the Caribbean. So my Haitian grandparents, my Haitian great-grandparents always wore kind of African print material. But I'll tell you one thing though, I was in Japan a few years ago, and we did a little photo shoot in Japan. And as we were shooting in Japan, we had these sweet Japanese women come over and say, "Oh my God, my mother wore this print when we were young." And so I just thought, wow, that just blew my mind, that women in Japan, so it must have gone from Indonesia, and we did, me and Iwan, I think we looked this up, and it did go from Indonesia to Japan. So it was just, it's so interesting how many links there are to this material. and how many people are connected to it. And I don't feel I have a right to deny people the use of that material if it's something they felt was part of their heritage or culture as well. And so it's just very interesting. And I get this question asked a lot about kind of cultural appropriation and how do I feel about that. But when I ask the women who I buy the material from, they say we want everyone to wear the material as long as they appreciate where the material comes from. And it's about showing gratitude to where it comes from and what has happened for it to get from point A to point B. And I think as long as you appreciate that, then it's, and you respect that, that's the most important thing. And so we grew up with this real respect for this material. And so my mother, when she wears it, she looks like a queen. And so I grew up with a woman who wore a head wrap, and every time she wore it, for me as a child, I thought, wow, she's a queen, she's amazing. And so what we want is for people to feel like that when they wear head wraps, that they feel like a queen and they feel a foot taller, they feel more confident, and they feel like they can rule the world. That's what we want anyway.
That's absolutely wonderful. I mean, you're right. It's wearing the crown, isn't it? It's definitely, it's interesting that you said, I've had a designer in Nigeria who made me an outfit with fabric from Nigeria. And then I was in China and the Chinese said, but that's our fabric. And I never considered it. And when I looked closely, it was Chinese print. And they said, in our culture, this is a wedding story. And I was just totally blown because it was completely a Nigerian outfit. But the fact that and traveled, and so I think the interesting thing for me, Iwan, even in your work and probably with you, Taslim, and maybe the Indian print, it's just the storytelling. Because whether it's the fish or the flower or whatever it is that they stamp, I mean, there's a whole conversation going on there. So when the Chinese said to me, and they showed me, this symbol means marriage, and this symbol, and I was totally blown. So Taslim, for you, that kind of, you travel a lot, you get textile from different places. Our father used to have textile, it's in our DNA. How do you feel about that?
I think that, fashion is for everybody. It's accessible to everybody, and it's a global village. And as long as people appreciate it and they turn it into beautiful pieces, I don't have any problem with it. I do have a problem with the cheap Chinese knockoffs of everything. I mean, a couple of years ago, in South Africa, with the shwe skirts particularly, we had all these China malls cropping up, and what they were then doing was buying the authentic one made locally and then mass producing it in China and selling it back to the same South African people at a fraction of the price. Which the reason I have a problem with it is because they're taking away the jobs of the local machinists, the local designers. And for me, that's a huge problem, especially in a country like South Africa, where unemployment is so high, where women could be empowered by having the skills to sew, but now you're having to compete. Already the prices are so low, but now you're competing with stuff that's even cheaper. And when they bastardize it, I have a problem with that. But if it's in an authentic form and, any creative person can take anything from anywhere and make it better, that's amazing. I can appreciate it from that eye for fashion. I mean, if you look at the history of fabric and stuff, we can go all the way back to the Silk Road, and then all the way back to where the cotton comes from. So for me, those are not important things. It's like, you're just adding different color, different print, different whatever, but you're still using a fabric that was created in a specific place at a specific time. So I think it's great that people take different ideas and mash it all together, because that's what it's about. I mean, at the end of the day, we're all human. It's one race. We are not different races. We are the human race. The colonialists brought about the color and the change, they'll separate us by race, etc. But generally, we are just people. We're just humans. And if we have an appreciation for well-made garments, the fabric is not that important. Yes, some people think it reflects your culture, but if I walk in the street, no matter where I go in the world, nobody knows where I'm from. They always find it so bizarre because it's a bit of this and a bit of that. But that is who I am. And everybody doesn't need to know that. It's a story that we're all telling. I mean, today I'm wearing a Palestinian scarf because I identify with the Palestinian struggle. That's a little bit of something I put into what I'm wearing, because for me it's about being conscientized about everything that's going on in the world all of the time. And I think sometimes we put things in boxes, and you think if you're a fashionable person, you don't really think about anything bigger. But what's happening in the world is far bigger than all of us. And it's important to have these discussions, especially now in this month, Women's Month, in Africa, with whatever's going on, and with the high rates of unemployment. I mean, I wish our South African powers that be look at what clothing and manufacturing and designers and dressmakers can bring to the society, how you can empower other people, how you can create a job from it and not have to rely on handouts, and that's global, and it's throughout the third world country. And you did mention something about Beyonce, but I did read that, Beyonce has this clothing line, and what they're paying the workers to make her clothing line. So to me, it's just a vast disparities of, what you're showing the world, but where you're sourcing your stuff from. I think, you were talking also earlier about what is, what's the word? Eco-friendly and sustainable. And I think that is a very important conversation that we don't really have in fashion, and it's become fashionable to say it. But if you don't feed or pay the people fair wages who are making those beautiful things for you, that in itself is a whole nother conversation. And it's huge in the fashion industry. And I think it's wonderful when you have big personalities showcasing your African heritage or your beautiful this and that, but it's also about where did they get it from? Is it just a pretty thing to promote myself? Or is it a pretty thing that I'm promoting for the benefit of the people making it? I think there's an issue there for me.
So I think there are several things that you bring up, and the issue around fair trade, which is important. I also want to say, my first time to China, which was really to sign the cultural agreement between South Africa and China, just as we got out into our democracy, I was fascinated by the silk that they had, because the Chinese really document everything. And I saw these pieces of amazing fabric. And I wondered, as I look at us on the continent of Africa and those of you in the diaspora, that, how much of this do we document? How much of this is storytelling? And in the same light, especially, Christelle, as you are doing your PhD, looking at clothing and fashion and Namibia and the history, the colonial history, how much of it is also a political statement? Because I think when we wear the, as you are wearing the kafia, Taslim, the Palestinian scarf, you are making a political statement. When I wear this headgear, I'm saying something, just as Sandra is saying something with her headgear, that everything we do because there is thought around it. It's not just something out of the blue. And I love the way you're saying it, Ayan, that it was a simple idea that took you down, several years and a 97-minute film to really discover where this fabric came from. So I'd like us to just pivot a little bit as we look at fashion as a political statement, as fashion, not just about, as you say, Taslim, where does it come from? Why are you wearing it? Who are you showing? At some point it was very big for people to wear a big designer label. It's like Louis Vuitton or Gucci, and then people, kind of changed it to other things. But somehow that brand thing is still there. And hopefully with COVID, some of this will change. And hopefully as your concerns around China, Taslim, in terms of cheap manufacturing and dumping of stuff into other communities and regions of the world, maybe there'll be a shift. So I'd like to start with you, with that shift that you've had. And I think I'm really intrigued and excited by the work that you do generally. So kind of moving from maybe what is personal into political, into fashion, into a statement.
Sorry, what's the question? I didn't quite understand that.
I would like to know if fashion has a political statement. Is there a politics around fashion?
Yeah, 100% there is. So if we just take, for example, the dashiki, which is known as Angelina, it featured very prominently in the civil rights movement. in America. And it was worn as a very direct statement against the powers that be, that we are Africans and we are Black and we want our rights as Black people in the society. And I think like listening to what Taslim was saying, I think sometimes it's very easy to say, yeah, we're the human race and all of this stuff. But at the end of the day, I don't get to move through this world as freely as lighter skinned people, as an example. I am a Black woman and my skin speaks before anything else, before they even hear that I have a British accent, as I said in the film. And I think that's something that has to be acknowledged, because whether we like it or not, whether it came from colonialism or the transatlantic slave trade or not, it still impacts me till today. And if I have a daughter, it's going to impact her. And so that's something that I have to address and deal with, right? So even like the fact that you use the term third world, that's problematic for me. There is no third world, there's one world. Why is some parts of the world called third world and some parts are called first world? Do you see what I mean? So these things are almost embedded in our very psyche. And so everything that you do as a Black person in this world is political. Just getting up in the morning and walking out of your house is almost like a political act. It's saying, I am stepping into this world as a Black person to take on whatever it is that this world gives me, the microaggressions, the macroaggressions, the systematic brutality, institutionalized racism, everything. Me stepping out into that is a political act. And so what you wear becomes a political act. Whether it's wearing a head wrap in an office, that's a political act. Because suddenly it's like, well, why are you wearing that? Oh, it's a cultural thing. Well, what does that mean? Having dreadlocks. There's a big debate right now in Jamaica where they've officially said you can actually ban dreadlocks in your, I think it's schools or workplaces, right? So my very existence, my body, my hair, everything about me is a political act. And so therefore everything that I wear is a political act. And I did want to address something as well that Taslim said about the Chinese and the cheap knockoffs coming in. And I agree with that. But then I often think, is it them? If you're allowed to do something, you're going to do it, right? For the most part, whether I'm not saying it's good, I'm not saying that it's bad, but I think that the responsibility lies with the African governments. So in Ghana, for a while, they had like a policy of dealing with the customs and not allowing certain knockoffs to come in. And I think the responsibility also lies with the governments to ensure that they take control of their borders and that they have laws in place to ensure that the Chinese can't bring these knockoffs into the country. Because like you just said, these fabrics are just as much the Chinese as they are Africans, Indonesians, and Europeans, right? I'm not saying it's right. I'm just playing devil's advocate. I'm not saying it's wrong or right. I'm just saying that I feel like there's a lot more to that than meets the eye. But anyway, yeah, in answer to your question, fashion is definitely political, particularly when you are a Black person in this world.
Christelle?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think clothing is very much political. And as you mentioned, that's part of the reason I am studying the clothing of the ladies in Namibia. And they very much appropriated those Victorian dresses for political reason. It was kind of a way to say to them, you know what, we're going to appropriate your clothes and almost mock them, but they've then twisted it and used African fabric to incorporate in their dress. And I think, there's a lot of clothing. Again, the head wrap is another one. Enslaved women started wearing head wrap because they're not allowed to have the hair out. So they decided, well, you don't want to let us do that, so let's put something nice around our hair. So definitely, I think clothing, and especially for African descent, has been used in many times as a political statement. And again, as I once said, I think even now people in the diaspora more and more are wearing African print clothing just to make a statement that, you know, we are African, we are Black, you have to accept us this way. We're not, we don't just want to wear your Western clothes. This is who we are. So I think definitely it is a form of identity, but also political, expressing your views. And again, all this, when you talk about appropriation, maybe this is again for someone to say, I am in solidarity with you in this protest. And so I'm gonna wear an African clothes. I know some white people will kind of wear African clothes to go to protest. And for that exact reason that again in the 60s they wear the dashiki. And again, I haven't got any problem with people. I think white people, I'm thinking wearing those kind of clothing if they really appreciate the culture and they are there in terms of solidarity, but also recognize that it's not their culture, but they're there to appreciate other people's culture. And yeah, definitely. I think I agree totally that we can use clothing as a political statement.
Absolutely. Sandra, I think you're doing quite interesting work because the headgear, even if I consider women, as you said, you know, cancer and people obviously losing hair at in particular. So trying to take in, and I also wanted to talk about the color, because we're not talking about, you know, black and white here. We're talking about bold, beautiful colors in the pattern that we have.
Yeah. So in a political sense, I have to agree wholeheartedly with Giselle and Iwan. I mean, when we wear it, we as Black women wear it, we are making a political statement. We are taking back ownership of something. This is who we are. We're saying this is who we are. And so, I mean, especially now with the Black Lives Matter movement, this is, so since the Black Lives Matter movement, I think I've sold 3 times the amount of head wraps I've sold in a very long time. And I think it is because Black women especially want to have something that they feel belongs to them. And so, and they want to be part, and that's their way of saying, look, I'm part of this movement. But in the same way, I went to the Black Lives Matter protest. There were lots of white people at the protest. Thank you, because we need you, and you're our allies, and we need you to be part of this fight. But also, they were also, you could see lots of kind of white women wearing the African print and saying, we are with you. We are, you know, we are on the same road as you. We're going to take this fight with you. And we need white people to be part of this movement because they have a part to play. So all of it is connected in a political way. What we wanted for the women wearing the head wraps, especially women who were feeling less like women, we wanted them to be bold, and we wanted them to feel confident and to feel like they were still women. And so what we wanted was, when we look at African print, we are looking for those really bright, bold colors, because we want you to stand out. There's no point in wearing a head wrap if you're not gonna stand out. We want, when you enter a room, everyone looks to say, oh, she's entered the room. And it doesn't, for us, that's the real beauty in it, is that you are claiming that space. You're claiming that space, and you are allowed to take up that space. And we definitely want Black women to feel like they can take up space, because for many years, we have not taken up space. And I think right now it's really important, especially for Black women, to take up these spaces. And if a head wrap helps you do that, that's exactly what we want.
I want to shift with a quick little comment. I was in Pakistan with a group of women, and you know, just Asian women, like African women, are always just beautifully well dressed. And there's this white American woman who said to me that she'd gone for some work, and then she stepped down, you know, from a hotel room because she was invited to a wedding, and she thought she put on the perfect little black dress. And she walked into this hall in Pakistan, and she stood out because everybody else was so beautifully glamorous, and she thought, you know, my little black dress should be it. But it's just that sort of shift, you know. And I remember one day, I needed to take a flight from I'd actually come, I think it was from Greece, and then was flying into Munich in Germany. And I was so astonished by just the sea of people in black suits, men and women. There was absolutely no color. And I know it was sometime probably in winter, but I think coming from Africa, you don't see that. And I know when I go into spaces, people immediately say, "Oh my goodness," because they see, you come in with color. So it's also a shift in the way that people see us.
Yeah.
So tell me, what would you say in terms of that, the fashion being a political statement? You have those wonderful peace signs that you've done as well.
Yeah. So, with the whole Islamophobia thing, I then decided to do, because people don't understand what Islam means. Islam means peace. It's a greeting. And so I did these T-shirts that, actually I have one on, can't really see it, but it says peace and love. It's written in an Arabic font, but it's basically saying peace and love, because that's what Islam is. So for people who don't know, you're trying to educate them. I think, with media, especially Western media, they try to find all the differences when we actually know there are just so many things that connect us. We are so similar in every way. Humanity is humanity. And unfortunately, people try to bring you down and break you up and put you into your little boxes, and we're not in little boxes. So for me,
about those T-shirts that you made, particularly in terms of the women's struggle, the UDF T-shirts, and then you made those were all political statements that people wore on that T-shirts.
Yeah, I think when it was a fashion week, and I decided I'd use the UDF as opposed to the ANC, and of course the ANC spokesperson was not happy with that, because why did I use the UDF? But for me, it's like
UDF means the United Democratic Front, and during the political uprisings in South Africa during apartheid, the ANC was banned, the African National Congress, and so the UDF T-shirts were very popular. But then post that period, the ANC had come in.
Yeah. Yes, and I wasn't trying to be overly political in any way. It's also a visual thing. So I liked the yellow, the red, and the black. It also stood for the workers' movement and that type of thing. And because the ANC and the DA and everybody else was getting just too much airtime, I thought, let's relook at something that, and they don't exist anymore, which is a shame, the UDF. So it was just kind of paying some respect to what it was, to that whole movement. And I think for me, whenever I do a fashion show, people who don't know, but if people ask, they'll see the value of something. I did once, I remember when the Bush administration, was it the Bush administration who started bombing Iraq? I had Soldiers of Peace as another one. They were the Red Cross, and they had Soldiers of Peace, because it's that play on words. And I think if you look at fashion through history, or just, people assume nowadays that fashionable people or people come from this very superficial world. They think you don't have any depth, but a lot of times your creativity comes from a place of something you're going through, pain, whatever you feel, and you try and express it in a creative way. And for me, I suppose growing up in a household with my sister Firdaus, who was the activist, we are not far removed from it. And I always have this way of trying to make everything look good in the world. And even if it's just a visual thing and in a superficial way, maybe through clothing, but I also want to educate people, because people don't know. The reason I wear the kafia as well is people don't know the story. So if you go and you research the story, and you need to get it also from the proper sources, you'll understand what it is. For South Africans, Mandela always said, we will never truly be free until Palestine is free. But, people don't get that. And I think that the world is becoming so polarized. You think you're moving forward. It's 2020, but we are getting to, I think, before even the civil rights movement, if you look at what's happening in America, it's shocking for us to come from South Africa, to go through this whole apartheid thing, and then to see it play out on TV, live, from the US, from Israel, from Palestine, from all these places. And you sit there and you're thinking, you just, you're viewing this, and it's all happening in front of you. But it
will be televised. The revolution will be live.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So what I'd like us to consider as we come to closing, usually on the F show, we say F is for something. I know F is for fashion, as you said, Taslim. So Iwan, what is F for?
Fabulous, darling.
Fabulous. Christelle?
Fantastic.
Fantastic. Sandra, I think you're muted. You're muted, darling.
Sorry. I'm going to say fire. I'm going to say fire again because I think we need fire.
Yes, F is for fire. Taslim.
I think for forward, future, we're always moving forward. So
forward and future. So I'd like to, if any of you have a last moment, a last word, a last something you need to say that I might not have asked you. Anybody want to say anything else? I think this was a wonderful discussion, and it's such a diversity of amazing people doing wonderful work. I would like to wish you all well. I'm very excited, Christelle. I'm also doing my PhD. I'm working in theater. So my topic is memory is a weapon. And as my sister said, I'm an activist. I was detained as a student activist. And it is really the memories I think we need to remember. And all of your work is about that. Going back to your grandmother, going back to Nigeria, going back to different parts of South Africa. And I love the work that you're doing in Namibia. It's such an important story because I think the Holocaust, which is really what happened in Namibia, people have not considered and don't know about what the Germans did there. So for you to shine a spotlight, I think is so, so important. Taslim, I thought that was interesting that she said, the women wearing those Victorian clothing, because you always said that even in South Africa, as African women, we tend to want to emulate the kind of Afrikaner clothing, isn't it? That whole Voortrekker stuff as well. So I think there's a lot to talk about in terms of heritage and maybe what is in your DNA without you even realizing it, that it's part of that. So may I ask you all, I could have a last sentence and we can start with Sandra.
Oh, last sentence is to let's celebrate cultures and prioritize and appreciate contributions of people of color.
And we must go to your website and find your wonderful clothing. You should have done a tutorial on how to tie the headgear.
Yes, we can put a link to a video underneath the video so people can see how to do it. But yes, please check out the website, support us. When you support us, you support other women. You support other women. You're supporting women when you support us. And that is the beauty.
Christelle?
My final word would be, let's embrace our heritage and embrace our African fashion.
Taslim?
I'll play on the F words and I'll say, fashion, fusion, familiarity, family. And I think all of that together will create a whole new future fashionista. You can check my clothing out on Instagram at Bulbulia Threads. That's where I post mostly.
And I want, since we started with you, we will end with your wonderful words of wisdom. What do you have to say?
Thank you. So I would say, and before I say that, I just wanted to say I really loved your collection, by the way, Taslim. I'm going to check that out when it's done. That was really beautiful. Okay, so I would say live boldly, unapologetically, and free from fear. And even if you make mistakes, that's okay, because it's better to make mistakes and learn and move forward than to stay stagnant. So do your thing, be fabulous.
Fashionistas, viva! Thank you, everybody. Thank you, and have a wonderful day. Thank you. Bye.